The first halt. The wind whistled through the cracks of the cab as the old Freightliner roared onto the night highway. The headlights cut through the dark, carving a path across the endless, almost sticky blackness of the American Midwest. For some, the open road was freedom. For John Crane, it had long since become something else entirely. At first glance, he was just another trucker, broad-shouldered, a faded baseball cap pulled low, his hands marked with scars from years of engines and heavy freight. Back home, a wife named Linda waited for him, along with two teenagers, Susan and Michael. Neighbors knew him as a good-natured man, the type who mowed his lawn on Saturdays and loved grilling burgers in the backyard. To them, he was the picture-perfect father, straight out of a beer or car commercial. But on the road at night, when hundreds of miles blurred together and rules dissolved into the dark, John became someone his family never knew. He loved the feel of the highway, the steady hum of the engine that lulled him into his own thoughts. But most of all, he loved the freedom out here, the anonymity of the dark. No cameras, no witnesses. Just him, the rig, and the endless stretch of asphalt pulling him farther and farther away. The first day of a new haul always stirred something restless inside him. A strange mix of anticipation and quiet satisfaction. For John, every trip was the beginning of a new story. A story known only to him and the night. "John, you'll be back in time for Susan's birthday, right?" Linda asked as he packed his duffel. Her voice was calm, but he caught the tension beneath it. "Of course," he said with a smile, kissing her cheek. "I already worked it out with dispatch. I'll be home in 2 days." Susan lingered in the doorway, studying him with suspicious eyes. She was at that age where questions started piling up, the kind adults hated to answer. John felt her unease. "You bringing something back?" she asked, a hint of challenge in her voice. "We'll see," he replied with a nod. "Maybe I'll find something interesting out there." It was tradition. He always returned with something. Not postcards or T-shirts, not the usual souvenirs. His gifts were odd, unsettling even. An antique lighter, a woman's bracelet engraved with initials, a wristwatch missing its band, a set of silver spoons. Linda sometimes joked that her husband had a knack for finding junk with history. At first, the kids were thrilled with whatever trinkets he brought, but over time their reactions grew colder, more guarded. John kept bringing them anyway. He knew he always would. That night the highway carried him across Missouri. The road stretched empty, with only the occasional car flashing past, headlights reflecting tired faces. John smoked cheap cigarettes and let an old country song crackle through the worn radio. The farther he drove from the cities, the easier it was to breathe, and the easier it was to go unnoticed. Up ahead, he spotted a figure on the shoulder. A woman with a backpack, jeans worn thin, jacket frayed, raising her hand. A hitchhiker. John's pulse quickened. He slowed the rig, the cab lights flickering across her face, tired but hopeful. She looked like she'd been walking for hours. He rolled to a stop and leaned out. "Where are you headed?" he shouted over the engine. "St. Louis, if you're going that way," she called back, managing a smile. He nodded and opened the door. She climbed in, setting the backpack at her feet. She smiled gratefully. He kept his own expression even, stealing quick glances at her. He knew how every journey began, and this one would be no different. John didn't rush into conversation. He knew how to listen. The girl, Rachel, she later told him, was eager to talk. She told stories about college, about wanting to head west, about her dream of making music. Her voice was light, almost naive. John nodded, grunted in agreement here and there. And deep inside, a familiar shadow began to stir. There were no cameras on this stretch of highway. No one to see. Tomorrow, the police might issue a bland bulletin, missing person. But tonight, it was just him and her. And somewhere back home, another souvenir was already waiting. The cab was its own little world, smelling of old tobacco, coffee from a thermos, and the dust of 1,000 miles. The busted radio drifted in and out, leaving long stretches of silence broken only by the growl of the engine. Her name was Rachel. She slipped off her jacket, resting her backpack on her lap. Her eyes burned with the stubborn light of youth, the kind that kept you going, even after sleepless nights on the roadside. "Do you always pick up hitchhikers?" she asked, lulled by the steady rhythm of the road. "Sometimes," John answered flatly. He didn't like talking much. But listening, yes, that he knew how to do. He let people spill their stories, waiting for the moment when they revealed more than they realized. Rachel's words flowed without pause. She told him how she'd left her small Kansas town, how her parents had tried to stop her, how she dreamed of singing on a big stage. Her voice was like a song itself, endless, raw, sincere. And beneath it, John felt the low thrum in his skull growing louder. He knew that feeling. It wasn't hunger. It wasn't lust. It was need. Hours later, they stopped at a gas station glowing blue under a buzzing neon sign. John filled the tank while Rachel went inside for coffee and snacks. He watched her through the glass. People. He'd seen so many of them. Clerks behind counters, truckers dozing in booths, women wrangling tired kids. To him, they were shadows, strangers passing through another reality. He'd stopped trying to cross into that world long ago. Rachel returned with a cup of coffee and a bag of chips, smiling as though she truly enjoyed all of it, the gasoline tang, the crunch of gravel, the fleeting conversations of strangers. "I love the road," she said, settling back into the cab. "Out here it feels real. No rules. No chores. Just movement." John shot her a look. There was something in her words that mirrored his own thoughts. But he would never admit it aloud. "The road doesn't take," he said quietly. "It gives." She frowned slightly, puzzled, but let it go. The night deepened as they rolled back onto the highway. The headlights carved only a narrow corridor of light. Everything else dissolved into black. John's thoughts grew heavier. He watched her hands wrapped around the coffee cup, the silver ring on her finger, the backpack she clutched as if it were life itself. His eyes always caught on details, on the little things people left behind. He already pictured that ring in the box he kept at home, hidden in the closet. He saw Linda's fleeting surprise, the silent unease in his children's eyes. The vision was sharp, familiar. Just as always. Around 3 in the morning, John turned off onto a dirt road. "Shortcut," he said, not looking at her. Rachel nodded sleepily. Her head drifted against the window, and by the time he slowed to a stop, she was nearly asleep. The rig idled in front of an abandoned motel. The sign hung half-broken, paint peeling from the doors, letters long gone. John killed the engine. Silence swallowed them whole. Rachel stirred, blinking in confusion. "Why are we stopping?" she asked drowsily. John stared at her for a long time. Then he smiled. "Because sometimes the road takes you exactly where you need to be," he said. His eyes gleamed in the dark. And with that, the cold certainty returned. It always came. First the restless anticipation, then the clarity. Tomorrow morning he would roll back onto the highway like nothing happened. The radio would chatter about traffic jams, politics, sports. No one would suspect that in the ruins of this forgotten place, something had vanished forever. And at home, his family would be waiting. And he would bring them a souvenir. His gifts always meant something. The souvenir. Morning greeted John with a clear sky and sunlight spilling over the suburbs. The highway that only hours ago had seemed like a bottomless void now looked almost welcoming. He pulled the rig into the company lot, tossed the keys to the dispatcher, signed a few forms, and climbed into his pickup. A few more minutes, and he was driving down the quiet street where his white-walled house and green lawn waited for him. John always savored these moments of return. From the outside, everything looked perfect: family life, the comfort of home, the smell of something baking in the kitchen. It was his cover, his other world, where he was a husband and father. And yet he always came back with the same feeling, like he carried something dark along with him. This time, buried between dirty t-shirts and a pack of cigarettes in his duffel, was a small velvet box. Inside, a silver ring with a stone. "Dad!" Michael was the first to run out, skinny and dressed in a sports t-shirt. He hugged his father so hard John nearly dropped the bag. "How was the run?" Linda asked from the kitchen doorway. She wore a robe, her hair tied back in a loose bun. There was always a trace of weariness on her face, no matter how she tried to hide it. "Same as always," John said with a smile. "The road is the road." Susan appeared later, coming down the stairs slowly with a book in her hand. Her gaze was cold, steady. "So what did you bring this time?" she asked without greeting him. Something clenched inside John's chest. She always asked with that particular tone, as if daring him to be honest. He reached into the bag, took out the box, flipped it open, and held it out to her. Susan froze. Surprise flickered in her eyes, then something closer to unease. "Is this real silver?" she asked. "Of course," John said evenly. "Picked it up at a little antique shop off the highway. Thought you'd like it." Linda stepped closer, taking the ring in her hand, studying it. "It's beautiful," she said. "But John, you know, we don't need to be spending money on things like this." "It didn't cost anything," he said quickly. "Just a trinket." He always said that, and the words always seemed to hang in the air like cobwebs. The evening passed in the warmth of family routine. Linda cooked dinner. Michael bragged about his progress on the basketball team. Susan stayed quiet, occasionally glancing at the ring on the table. She hadn't put it on. John watched them carefully, hiding the weight pressing at him. These moments mattered to him, sitting among his family, listening to their voices. Yet he knew something else was there too. Something unseen, a fragment of the world he lived in at night. And when he looked at Susan, he knew. She could feel it. She didn't know what yet, but something inside her was beginning to suspect. Late that night, after the house had gone quiet, John sat in the living room with a half-smoked cigarette in the ashtray. On the table before him rested an old wooden box. He opened it. Inside lay dozens of small objects. A scratch lighter. A woman's bracelet engraved with initials. A pocket knife. Each one carried its own story. Each one was a silent witness to something that was never meant to see the light. John slipped the ring inside, placing it at the very bottom. He traced his finger across the cold metal as though sealing a pact. Then he closed the lid slowly. Relief washed over him, the same as always. As if, for a moment, he was whole again. The next morning, Susan wandered into his office. She knew about the cabinet he always kept locked. No matter how hard he tried to play the part of an ordinary father, something pulled her toward it. She stood in front of the cabinet for a long time, staring at the lock, before she heard footsteps and stepped back quickly. John walked in. His eyes fell on her. For a moment, silence stretched between them. "Do you need something?" His voice was calm, but unease stirred inside him. "No," she said quickly. "Just looking." He nodded. But deep down he knew she was beginning to see more than she should. That night John lay awake beside Linda, listening to her steady breathing, thinking about his daughter. She was smart. Too smart. And if one day she opened that cabinet, then what? He refused to follow the thought further. But the road was always waiting, and the road always demanded new souvenirs. The wife. Linda woke before everyone else. The sun was only just beginning to slip through the blinds, painting stripes of light across the kitchen wall. She set the kettle on and stood at the window, staring at the empty street. The world felt like it was holding its breath while she tried to make sense of her thoughts. Something about John had changed. Not all at once, but slowly, so that even those closest to him barely noticed. But Linda, who had lived with him for nearly 20 years, saw it clearly. He was more withdrawn, often stayed up in the living room long after the rest of the house had gone to bed. And his gifts? At first, they seemed harmless, even charming. Who wouldn't smile at an antique lighter or bracelet? But lately, she felt something different about them. The souvenirs carried a weight, a presence, as though they dragged unease into the house with them. That morning, she stepped into Susan's room. Her daughter sat on the bed with a book, though her face was distant. On the nightstand lay the ring John had brought. "Why aren't you wearing it?" Linda asked. "Don't want to," Susan answered flatly, without looking up. "It's pretty. Maybe. But it feels wrong, Mom." She finally lifted her eyes. "Dad never says where he gets these things." The words cut deeper than Linda expected, because it was the same question she had been asking herself for a long time. That evening, when John went out to the store, Linda finally gathered the nerve to step into his office. She knew about the cabinet, the one he always kept locked. She had told herself for years that a man was entitled to his private space. But now the cabinet had become an obsession. She moved around the room, brushing her fingers across books, pausing over old photographs. John holding baby Michael, the family at a picnic. He looked happy then, the man she had once fallen in love with. But why did he feel like a stranger now? Her eyes rose to the cabinet. The lock gleamed in the lamp light. She tugged at the handle, though she knew it was useless. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Her heart lurched as she stepped back sharply. But it was only Michael. "Mom," he said sleepily, "what are you doing?" "Just tidying up," she answered, forcing calm into her voice. Michael shrugged and wandered off. But Linda knew, sooner or later, she would have to open that cabinet. That night John came home. She was waiting in the kitchen. "You're still up?" he asked, shrugging off his coat. "Couldn't sleep," she said. "John, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "These things you bring home, where do you get them?" He froze for just a second, then recovered. "Here and there. Sometimes I buy them, sometimes I find them." "Why?" "They're strange. Sometimes it feels like they carry a story. I don't know how to explain it." John laughed, but the sound was dry. "They're just trinkets, Linda. Don't worry about it." She nodded, but the unease didn't fade. It deepened. The next day, Linda went into town. She ran into Alice, an old acquaintance who worked as a reporter at the local paper. They chatted. "Another girl went missing," Alice said, unfolding a newspaper. "Somewhere near St. Louis. Seems like there've been more of them lately." Linda froze. Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. "Really?" she whispered. "Yeah. Mostly hitchhikers. Young women. Police think someone's hunting them along the highways." The words rang in Linda's head all day, like a tolling bell. And that evening, when she saw the ring still lying on her daughter's nightstand, her heart nearly stopped. That night, while John slept, Linda stood before the cabinet again. The lock stared back at her, immovable. But she knew now, the answers were in there. She swore to herself, one day she would find the key. Because if she didn't, the souvenirs would keep arriving, like ghosts carried in from the road. And maybe one day, the road would claim someone from her own family. children. Michael had always loved the gifts from his father. To him, they were a sign of attention, proof that Dad thought about him even when he was hundreds of miles from home. On the shelf in his room stood these treasures: a skull-shaped lighter, a pocket compass with no needle, a stack of old baseball cards. He would show them off to his friends, boasting, though he often couldn't explain where they came from. But lately, even he had started to feel something strange. At night, nightmares haunted him. A road stretching into darkness, the silhouette of a semi dissolving into the void. When he woke, his eyes always landed on the shelf of souvenirs, and he couldn't shake the feeling that those things were alive. Susan felt differently. If before she had accepted the gifts out of politeness, now she almost openly rejected them. The ring John had brought her last time still lay untouched on her nightstand, a silent reproach she couldn't ignore. "Why don't you wear it?" Michael asked one evening as they sat in his room. "Because it doesn't belong to me," she replied. "Don't you get it? None of these things are really ours. But Dad found them for us. And have you ever heard him say exactly where?" Her voice sharpened. "He always dodges the question." Michael fell silent. He hated arguing with his sister, but her words planted themselves in his mind like seeds. One day, Susan and Michael were home alone. Linda had gone shopping, John was on the road. Susan walked into her brother's room, sat on the bed, and stared at his collection. "Mike, have you ever thought these things might have belonged to people who—" She hesitated, choosing her words. "Aren't alive anymore?" Her brother frowned. "You mean dead people?" She nodded. "That's ridiculous." He laughed nervously. "Dad would never. He's not like that." But his voice wavered. Susan walked up to the shelf and picked up the skull-shaped lighter. Her fingers trembled. "Do you feel it?" she asked. "It's like they carry something inside them. A memory." Michael turned away, unwilling to hear it. That evening, when their father came home, Susan watched him closely at dinner. Her gaze was sharp, cold. She caught every gesture, every word. "Dad," she said suddenly, "did you see anything strange on your last trip?" John looked up, his hand freezing midair with the fork. "Strange? What do you mean?" "Well, people have been disappearing. It was in the papers. Maybe you heard something." He quickly looked away, swallowing a piece of meat. "Nothing like that," he said. "The road's always dangerous, but I didn't see anyone suspicious." Susan stared at him in silence for a few more seconds, then set down her fork and walked away from the table. Michael stayed. He had seen his father's face tighten for just a moment. And for the first time, it occurred to him that his sister might be right. That night, he couldn't sleep. He opened the drawer by his bed, took out the compass. He turned it in his hands. The needle was missing, yet he thought he heard a faint whisper, like the echo of a road. He shoved the compass under his pillow, but that only made it worse. Meanwhile, Susan was writing in her diary, her letters neat and precise. "Dad is hiding something. I know it. His gifts are proof. But how do I tell Mom? She's afraid. And Michael's too young to understand. If I'm wrong, fine. But if I'm not?" She put the pen down, closed her eyes, and heard the hum of an engine, though the night outside was silent. The road had come into their home. The next morning John was getting ready for another haul. Michael ran onto the porch, hugged him, but felt a strange chill. "Bring me something, Dad," he asked, trying to sound like he always did. "Of course, son," John smiled. Susan stood in the doorway motionless. "I don't want anything," she said quietly. Their eyes met, and John understood. His daughter no longer believed him. When the pickup disappeared around the bend, Michael turned to his sister. "Why did you say that?" he asked. "Because nothing is better than another thing dragged out of the dark," she answered. and for the first time, he had nothing to say back.